you. And if you don't know me, thank you, Anne, for introducing me. I'm Jay Matlin. I'm the Systems Administrator for the Fairfield County Office of Information Technology. We're kind of the behind the scenes IT people, if you will, since you guys do have your own IT staff. So a lot of times if something goes on that your IT staff are not able to take care of, or just is something that the county typically takes care of, that they generally escalate that to one of us. So if I can make this do its thing here. So just a little background on me. I received my Bachelor's of Science in Networking Communications Management from DeVry in 2010, and a Master's of Science in Information Systems Management from Kaplan in 2015. I worked in the corporate world for all of about 9 months and decided that it just wasn't a good fit for me. And I got hired in the not-for-profit sector. I worked for Bloom Carroll Schools for a few years as a computer support specialist. And then I got hired, actually, those of you that don't know me, I got hired at the Fairfield County Board of Developmental Disabilities in 2012, and I was the IT manager for a few years before I moved down to the auditor's office. And I have served in several capacities in the auditor's office. I started out as just security, physical building security, video surveillance, access control. So a lot of you, if you ever get your badges reprinted or your photos retaken for your badges, or you need your access changed, that kind of thing, I handle that stuff still. And then I moved into server administration when Andrew Steeman left a couple of years ago, and now I've just taken over as systems administrator. So I've been with the county for what feels like a super long time. But it has not been that long. It's been fun. So so I was asked to talk about email etiquette, and those of you that were present at the DD staff in-service several years ago, I gave a similar presentation during the in-service, and so I figured we would relive some of that. I apologize if you see my eyes drifting. I've got my phone up in front of my monitor and I'm trying to read the PowerPoint and make eye contact with the Zoom meeting. So I apologize if that looks weird to anybody. So let's start with just some fun facts about email. I work in IT, so I'm kind of a nerd. So I like to learn about this kind of stuff. So I thought this might be interesting for you guys too. Electronic mail is obviously what it used to be called. We shortened it to email, and email actually existed prior to the internet itself. MIT developed it in 1965, and it was purely just a system where people could leave messages for each other on the same computer. So the trick was that if you were using the same computer as a friend or a coworker, you could leave them a message on that computer, but it didn't leave that computer. So the thing that sucked is if you had two computers next to each other, you couldn't message the computer next to it and have your friend pick it up. They had to be using the exact same computer. So the military realized that might be useful, and they added email to the ARPANET, which is the Advanced Research Projects network that the Department of Defense uses to share project-based information between themselves inside their network. And they implemented email on ARPANET in 1971. And by 1976, 75% of the traffic on ARPANET was actually just email. So then somebody decided, hey, wouldn't it be cool if email could leave the Department of Defense and go somewhere else? So that was the invention of the internet, really. So email existed before the internet, and because we wanted to be able to email everybody else, we came up with the internet. So email used to be seen as a luxury back in the late 80s, early 90s. And then now we kind of look at it as a requirement. I know I still look at people weird when they tell me that, you know, they don't check their email, or they don't have their email on their phone, or they have to log into a computer to check their email. Especially since I use it all day, every day. So as of 2019, there were more than 3.9 billion email users worldwide, and that continues to grow. And the statistic, for those of us that have multiple email addresses, the statistic is that most people have, on average, 1.7 mailboxes. So that kind of tells you most people have more than one mailbox that they use on a daily basis. So let's talk about the contents and, of an email and how an email is made up. So you have several parts of an email. You have what most of you probably will not see in Outlook unless you've specifically added it in your Outlook is the from line. You have the to line, you have line, then you have a subject, and then you have the body of the message, and then you have your signature. So let's break that down a little bit. The address lines at the top, what are those used for? So the from line, a lot of you probably haven't used the from line unless you are someone who does a send as. I can think of a couple people in your organization that send as other people or masquerade as other people when they send email just to make the email appear that it came from that person. You also, if your agency was to implement something like email faxing, you would use the from line in order to send a fax because you have to change the from line to send as the fax line and not as your actual email. And then of course you have the to line, and the to line is obviously where you're going to fill in where people go, where the email is going to go, and then the CC line and the BCC line. So CC is carbon copy, BCC is blind carbon copy, and there's a lot of confusion around when to use which line on the email and how to appropriately use those lines. Your to line is your primary recipient, so the person that the email is actually directed toward. So then you would fill in the CC line to anyone that the information may be pertinent to, but that's not necessarily directed at. For example, if you're in the middle of working on a project, you might send something to a department head, and that would be the to line, but then you'd want to carbon copy the project manager just so the project manager knows where we're at on this particular step in the project or something like that. That's where you would use the CC line. I think a lot of times the CC line gets used inappropriately in a means to let's use a good example of, I want your supervisor to know that I've had to send you this email 3 different times. So now I'm going to copy your supervisor and my supervisor on that. Well, was the information in the email pertinent to the supervisor other than for you to go, hey, I've sent this email 3 different times? Probably didn't add to the conversation, so probably not pertinent to the supervisor. And so in my opinion, that's an inappropriate use of the CC line. If you talk about the blind carbon copy, so blind carbon copy is the same thing as the CC line, except when the recipient opens the message, it won't show that anybody in the BCC received anything because it's a blind carbon copy. The appropriate use for this is, for example, if you're sending out an email to a bunch of people who need to know about a training that you're doing, but the people you're sending the training notification out to don't need to know who the other people were. You would use the BCC line to keep privacy and to ensure that the other people can't see who the email was also sent to, just out of courtesy. You might also use the blind carbon copy line to send something to like a distribution list, and you want to prevent a reply all. I use the blind carbon copy a lot when I send out IT related emails to the entire county. I put the all county email in the BCC line so that you can't see who I sent it to, so you can't get an idea of who the group was or list of people, whatever. But also it prevents somebody from saying, because I typically always get a reply of a question or a follow-up, and that's fine. I am happy to answer questions, but I don't want you to accidentally hit reply all and send a message to the entire county and hopefully not cause a reply all disaster. So then I have that cute little meme over there that, that's sometimes what the CC is used for, to accidentally send the wrong thing to the wrong person. The subject line. So the subject line needs to be used in every single email. You should not send an email with no subject line or a non-descriptive subject line like hey, or I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but hey and blank subject lines are some of my largest pet peeves. So the subject line is basically a quick about me section for the body of the message. It should just say quickly that what they're going to read in the email, and the email is obviously going to be the more detailed section. So the subject line should say something along the lines of, meeting at 2, and maybe you have an agenda attached to it, or something like, it should be descriptive. It shouldn't be too long. It should not be the entire email. So we'll talk about the body of an email next, but the subject line should not contain the body of the email. I need you to come to my office at 2 p.m. because I need to talk about your performance evaluation. And then you open the email and all the email has in it is the person's signature or the name or thanks. That's not what the subject line is designed for. So you should also avoid things like generic subject lines that are perhaps added in by default, such as attached image, which is added in by a copier. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But you should avoid all caps, all lowercase, or my favorite, putting links in the subject line. So since we've moved to Office 365, we're having to retrain our junk and spam filter, and those types of things in the subject line seem to trigger the spam filter. If you put a link in the subject line, all caps is a huge trigger for spam and junk filtration, that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that the subject line is actually pertinent to what the email is going to be about. And the final thing about your subject line, and I'm guilty of doing this, I will find an old email that came from somebody and I need to email them. So instead of just composing a new message to them, I will just reply to the old message, and the subject line doesn't match the content of the actual email. That's seen as unprofessional and inappropriate. So if you're going to send someone an email, you just want to make sure that you don't go back and say, find an email that was about something unrelated from 3 months ago, and now all of a sudden you're going to reply to that message. And I will give you 2 reasons. The subject line that was used from 2 or 3 months ago is no longer pertinent anymore. That project is done. That email thread is done. The other reason, and I use this in my Outlook inbox, I sort my Outlook inbox by conversation, and Outlook does that based off of subject line. So if somebody replies to an email that came 4 months ago, it's going to get thrown into that group of messages where I may have already archived that group of messages, or I may have deleted the entire thread altogether. So it's just important that when you choose a subject line, you choose something that is actually relevant to the current email and the current date and time. So next is your email body. Your email body is exactly what it says. It's the body of the message. If you were typing a letter, it's the body of the letter. It's where the message is actually going to go. So something to remember is that I think a lot of people have taken this to extremes sometimes. Your email message should be easy to read. And what I mean is not, grammatically correct. And of course I do mean grammatically correct and proofread and spell checked and that kind of thing, but easy to read in the fact that the font should be uniform through the message. The font size, the actual font, the color, background, that kind of thing. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, before we started moving to Office 365, we limited email to what is called plain text. And plain text won't let you change the colors, won't let you change the backgrounds, doesn't let you change the fonts. Well, now we've allowed what's called HTML emails, which actually uses HTML code to allow you to format the message with different colors, different fonts, different sizes, that kind of thing. And honestly, intra-county emails, if you want to change the background of your message to something yellowy, like the color of the county logo, and then you want to use another kind of yellow text on top of it because it looks cool. The thing is inside of the county that might translate well, but if you send an email to outside the county and say they're getting it on their Gmail account, Gmail may not be able to read that text the exact same way that your Outlook message did. So that yellow on yellow or purple on purple, something like that, may be hard for the other person to read, and they may just simply not respond because they can't read your message. So it's important that you just use black text on a white background. I know everybody likes the pretty emails with the pretty backgrounds and the pretty background colors and that kind of things. For formatting and just from a professionalism standpoint, black on white background just looks the best. It's easier to read, and it's easier for the spam filter to catch things that maybe, because that's a common tactic with spammers. They'll use a different font or they'll use HTML code to get something past our filter that shouldn't necessarily be passed through. I make a joke, and I read this in an article in this presentation, but Comic Sans should never be acceptable anywhere. So just don't use that. I'm sorry, that's my dry humor. So next, your email should always have a signature. And a lot of people just think of a signature as your name, but your signature should have a lot of other pieces and parts to it. Your signature should include your full name, your title, who you work for, whether, like me, I just put Fairfield County, you may put Fairfield County Board of Developmental Disabilities, that kind of thing. And it should include your email address and then also some other contact means, like a phone number, an address, something. But you don't want your signature line to end up being, this long, because you've got so much information in there. And the other thing you got to kind of try to squeeze in there is a confidentiality statement or a privacy statement. And I know DD is very good about having their privacy and confidentiality statements, but the rest of the county does not use privacy or confidentiality statements for the most part. And I put the second box there that yes, even on replies, I've just made a good habit that even on my replies, it has my full signature with my title, my name, where I work, that kind of thing, just to ensure that there is no mistake where the email is coming from. Even if you think back to some email threads that are, maybe tens of emails back and forth, just having your reply in there, it makes it easier for people to know who they're talking to. And I also put in there that your signature should be preceded by 2 hyphens. I know this is kind of an old-fashioned thing to do, but I still do it. It makes it easier for email systems and spam filters to truncate the signature off of the actual message. Your signature is generally considered part of your body, but actually it's a separate part of the email. And the 2 hyphens just kind of tell email systems that, hey, this is maybe not a necessary part of the actual email body, so it can truncate it off of there. Definitely not a requirement. It's just something that I do. And personally, it makes me feel like my email looks a little more put together than just to have a blob of signature at the bottom of the message. You kind of see two hyphens, and that indicates that my message has ended. The other thing to remember with your signature, it should not contain quotes, pictures, other irrelevant items, like that kind of thing. Yeah, Lisa, I think I have an email coming up here, and I can give you an idea. Actually, let me go back here. So you can see here where the bottom of my email has my signature, and then there's 2 hyphens just at the top. And then, excuse me. I honestly, when you go into your signature design, I've added an extra line above those hyphens too, so that, I mean, you can make that signature work for you. Hang on, I can't make it bigger right now. I will show you at the end, and I'll make it a little bigger.
Jay, I'll look and see if I have one from you that I can share in a minute.
Okay. I only shared my PowerPoint, not my entire screen, so I can't. So this is my favorite topic, reply all. So
please let us unmute. No, I'm just kidding.
So talking about reply all, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves. So if you look at my 3rd bullet point there, if you're going to reply all, the thing to think about is, does your reply add anything to the conversation? If it doesn't add anything to the conversation, there's really no point in making a reply. Reply all should be used sparingly. And I mentioned with using the blind carbon copy field, If you use the blind carbon copy field, that prevents the reply all, because at that point, there's no one to reply to, because the email that was received has no recipients on it other than who sent it. So even if they hit reply all, then they're only going to be able to respond to the one person that sent the message. And we can wait until the end. I've got a slide about questions. We can add it there. Just remind me, because I'll probably forget about it. So the reply all should just add something additional to the conversation. If you're like the meme that is here, if you're just replying all to say I agree, they didn't add anything to the conversation. Great, congratulations, you agree with what the email was sent. Probably everybody else in the email agrees also. That's just an unnecessary response. Thanks or thank you is unnecessary. My favorite, and you've probably gotten these a couple of times, sometimes somebody will reply all and they'll make a snide remark or make a sarcastic comment. The most recent one that I remember is we sent something from the IT department, and somebody, a sheriff's deputy, responded and did a reply all, and they sent the message to the entire county making a snide remark about the contents of the email. But we, as the IT department, have preventions for that kind of thing in place also. So we've got things in place that prevent that kind of thing from happening. And that is, we limit the people who can send to the group everyone that sends to the entire county. And we can put limits like that on other mailing lists as well. And I have two cases of when reply all went really bad. The first one was Spirit Airlines. A disgruntled customer had sent an email to their customer service division, and they basically wanted their money back because they were unsatisfied with their flight. And the disgruntled customer service person sent it to their supervisor, and they just didn't know how to handle it. So they ended up sending it to the CEO of Spirit Airlines. Everybody in the chain was still on the message, and the CEO hit reply all, and including the customers, not just the customer service representatives. It included the disgruntled customer on his reply, and his reply basically said, I don't care what the customer wants, they're not getting a refund. They may be unsatisfied now and say they're never going to fly with us again, but next time they want to save a buck, they'll book airline tickets and fly with us again, and I'm not refunding anything. So that's one case of, just be aware of who you're sending messages to and who you're replying. And it kind of irritates me sometimes that the reply and reply all button are right next to each other. And I sometimes hit reply all, and then we'll talk about this in the next slide about verifying who you're sending a message to. I apologize if you can hear the dog barking in the background. She barks at everything. The second case study is out of the United Kingdom, and it's the United Kingdom National Health Services. Hang on just a second.
I just love that if you watched his face right there, he went, Saska! Because you're
Yep. So the second case study is out of the United Kingdom with the National Health Service, and for some reason, a help desk support person sent a test email to the entire NHS organization. So NHS employs 1.2 million people. So he sent a test message out, did not do any type of protection on it, did not do a blind carbon copy. Well, someone, just for funsies, said reply all and sent something reply all. Well, hitting reply all means that they sent a reply all to 1.2 million users. Then somebody else replied all and sent to 1.2 million users. So as you can imagine, these emails build up quickly. This happened over and over and over again for a span of time, and ended up the entire email system for the National Health Services crashed, and no one was able to send any emails because the system was so overwhelmed with emails that the system just couldn't handle it anymore. So if that gives you an idea, every time you reply all, I mean, here in the county, we've only got 850 mail users, but sending a reply all and generating that message 850 times every time you do a reply, you can see how excessive that would get rather quickly. So the next couple of slides are just general professionalism and emails. Emails are used for quick communications, but aren't text messages. And I think that's an important differentiation between emails and text messages. Texts are made to be informal. They're made to be quick. You know, I can't pick up the phone and make a phone call real quick, so I'm just going to send a quick text. And an email, especially in a professional setting, is meant to be a quick communication, yet professional. Remember to use appropriate salutations. Hello, good afternoon. I did learn, I was reading something yesterday, I did learn that to whom it may concern is actually not an appropriate salutation in your email. That just shows the recipient that you didn't do enough research to see who to address the email to. So that's seen as unprofessional. But things like, hey, yo, I say howdy a lot to people, but I probably said it to someone I know. On what's up, those types of things are just not professional, and they shouldn't be considered an appropriate salutation in an email. The next line is acknowledge that you received the email, even if it's something that you really needs no acknowledgement. But the important thing is, if the email wasn't intended for you, I know a lot of our confidentiality and privacy statements include a line that says that if you are the unintended recipient of this message, please delete it. That's great and all, but you should also acknowledge to the sender that they've sent an email to the incorrect person, and they may want to look into what email they have. I get this a lot on my personal Gmail account. My Gmail account is j.matlin@gmail. There's the J Matlin in New Jersey, and his email is j.matlin1@gmail. So I get a lot of his email. It happens more often than you would think it does. And I always reply to the people, tell them like, hey, you're probably looking for Jay Matlin in New Jersey, who is a lot fancier, richer, and smarter than I am, because he's a really important research scientist. So here is his email address, so you may want to fix that. But you know, unless you tell somebody that they sent the email to the wrong recipient, they don't know. Obviously, don't respond to spam messages and that kind of thing. But you know, if I'll use Justin Grant that used to work in our county human resources department. There's a Justin Grant that used to work at JFS, and there was a Justin Grant that worked in HR. And a lot of times they would get each other's emails. And at that point, I think it's important intra-county to let someone know that they've sent an email to the incorrect person, and you may want to check into that before you send another message, especially for you guys that are dealing with, you know, HIPAA protected information, that kind of thing. So that's important to acknowledge the email. The other important thing, and this should be common sense, but it's for some reason not, proofread your message before you hit send. And I'll add the next bullet point, you know, add your recipients last. So if you didn't know, there's a keyboard shortcut to send email, and it's Control Enter. So I use Control Enter a lot because I don't use my mouse a whole lot when I'm using the computer. I use keyboard shortcuts for just about everything. And Control Enter is my best friend. But if you've typed an email and perhaps you weren't quite ready to send it, I get down to the bottom of the message, and I have a habit of real quick just hitting Control Enter and sending the message. But a way to check that is add your recipients last. If you're composing a new message, then just wait until the very end. So if you go to send it, no one's on there, and you can't accidentally send a message to the wrong person. Or I know it's a therapy technique to type or to write when you're angry or upset about things, and some people do take that to heart in the office, and they type up emails, and they make a mistake of sending of adding their supervisor to the to line, or the coworker that they're angry with to the to line. For some reason, I don't know why you would do that, but then they end up accidentally sending the message to the wrong person, or they send it to somebody that it wasn't intended for. So add your recipients last, and then just make sure you're proofreading your email, checking. I mean, Outlook has spell check and grammar stuff built in. I actually noticed that Office did an update, and it has a lot more robust grammar and spell checking in it all of a sudden in the last couple of weeks, which is kind of nice. The next bullet point is to check your emotions. If you're really upset about something, step back from your computer, step back from your phone, check your emotions before you send something to somebody that you may regret later on, because just remember, once you put it into text and send it, it's gone. And we'll talk about that in a second. My next point is to use an auto response when appropriate. And this is another thing that sounds like common sense. But sometimes like someone will return from vacation and say they've been off for a week and they've got a lot of emails to check and it's going to take them a couple of days to get through them. So they put another auto response on that says, hey, I just returned from vacation on Monday. I'm trying to get through things. I apologize for the slow response, but I will take care of things in which they come in the order in which they come in. Don't do that. That's unprofessional and frankly annoying. Just people don't expect you to answer an email within, the first 10 minutes that you send the email, unless there is some sort of deadline or time restriction on that email, which at that point, that's where you're going to use the important checkbox to say that it's important, or you're going to put something in the subject line that says, project X need response by. And that was something I meant to mention when we were talking about subject lines, is a lot of people sort through their email based off of the subject line and off of the priority line. So I know I come in first thing in the morning and the first thing I check is the subject line of the emails that came in overnight. And like in IT, we have several request tracker queues, upwards of 6 or 7 request tracker queues that we use internally. And I check the subject line just to see where those subject lines come from. Like we have security incidents and that kind of thing. So I check first to see if there's anything from that request tracker queue. And then next I check the other request tracker queues that we have that aren't maybe so important, but are important first thing in the morning. And then I review my email messages and I'm looking for that red exclamation point to see if somebody sent me something that needs taken care of right now before I get started on something else. So, it's just, we'll go back to subject lines. Use your subject line appropriately. So the next one, did I have a funny meme on the last one? Did I forget that one? Yeah, so there's Fry from Futurama. Not sure if I should send a thank you email or not bother them with an extra email. So yeah, just use your discretion to determine. That's acknowledge that you received the email. Just if you're just sending an email to say thanks, probably not necessary, but if it's something pertinent that you need to send a response to, go ahead and say, I received your email. So the next one is what I was mentioning a minute ago. So step back, check your emotions, because just remember, once you send the email, there is that option in Outlook to do a recall on a message. But the thing with recall is I've never really had it work well. It sometimes works in the event of an emergency, like you sent out an email. I'll use an example from when I worked in another organization. We were doing a weight loss challenge, and somehow the Excel spreadsheet that the person that was running the weight loss challenge, keeping track of everyone's weight loss, somehow that Excel spreadsheet got sent to the entire organization. So in that event, IT has methods of getting, administratively deleting messages from people's inbox, like in that type of situation. But for the most part, just remember that when you hit send, it's gone. And it's in the recipient's mailboxes, it's in the internet, it's gone. We can try and recall it, but it doesn't work well. And the other thing to remember toward the bottom of this slide is a lot of what we do is a public record. So if you are sending an email and you don't want your mom or your grandma to see what you said, or your supervisor for that matter to see what you said, let's not put it in an email. And and at that point, if it's something sensitive that needs discussed, that's probably the point in time that you need to pick up the phone and just make a phone call to the person you're sending the email to. Or if you're sending an email that's exceptionally complicated with a lot of details in it, just pick up the phone and explain it, and then say, hey, I'm going to send you this email. This is what it's about. Please look over it, whatever, that kind of thing. Just sometimes you're still going to have to pick up the phone. I like email too, but sometimes you have to pick up the phone or actually go visit the person and talk to them in person. The next thing is careful with your exclamation point usage. This tweet over here on the right side of the slide is one of my favorite. That she's using an exclamation point, so she's friendly and excited, but now I'm using a period so that I'm not crazy. Here's another sentence with a period as a buffer, proving my normalness. Thanks so much. Some people are exclamation point crazy. If you're going to use one, use it sparingly and only use one at a time. Don't put 3 or 4 exclamation points, that kind of thing. Please don't type in all caps. For decades now, using all caps indicates that you're yelling, and using all, and I know some of us are guilty of doing it, especially if you're heavy Munis users, because Munis used to make you you used to have to use caps lock in Munis to input things into Munis. And now you don't have to do that. So you can turn the caps lock off, back away from the keyboard for a second, and use proper case on your sentences instead of typing in all caps, just because it just doesn't come across as friendly or professional. Things to avoid in email. These are just a couple of things, and we've already kind of touched on some of this. Slang, abbreviations. I know DD is, you guys have a lot of alphabet soup. The abbreviations and acronyms work well probably inside your organization, but just be careful using those outside the organization, because people aren't going to understand what the acronym is. So that's just something to watch. Text lingo is never acceptable in an email message ever. Humor, jokes, sarcasm, unless you know for certain that the person on the other end is going to get your humor, your joke, or your sarcasm, I would avoid using it in an email, just because it can be misconstrued and it can lead to other questions and problems. And I have text lingo listed twice. I must have ran out of boxes. The other thing to remember, and I do this all the time, and I guess I don't think about it. People probably know that they're going to get email from me at odd times. But the thing to remember is, a lot of us, especially now working from home, we have our emails on multiple devices, and getting emails in the middle of the night may wake someone up. It may cause alarm. The other thing to remember is that sending an email, like if Anne were to send an email at 2 o'clock in the morning to me, I would probably question, like, that's kind of odd from Anne. In a spam system, it's also going to think that's odd. So sometimes sending at odd times can trigger the spam system, and it can trigger the email to be thrown into junk. And then people just don't see their email. And that's another thing I didn't put in here. Since we moved to Office 365, make sure you're checking your junk folder and retraining your Outlook. So this one I just threw in here. You know, we live in Lancaster and Fairfield County. We're like #3 least diverse community in the entire United States. So, but this is something to remember, that other cultures don't communicate the exact same way that we do. Typing your email straight to the point to someone with a Japanese or a Chinese heritage they may take that as offensive, or you're being curt with them. They may think that you're angry, or they've angered you somehow. So these are there's a couple things on this slide, and I'm not going to read them to you, but just to be aware of that other cultures don't communicate the same way that we Americans do. And it's important to keep that kind of thing in mind while you're communicating with people, especially over email, where you can't read tone, you can't read humor. It's hard to maybe tell what somebody is actually saying without reading between the lines. And several of us are not good at reading between the lines, and we overanalyze everything in an email anyway. So it's important to be aware of who you're speaking to. So let's look at some of my favorite email pet peeves. So I'm sure you can see from here what is wrong in this email a lot. There's a lot going on here, and this is not an email that you should ever send. First of all, it's typed in Comic Sans, and that's just unacceptable in 2020. The multiple fonts, the underlining, the different changes in font sizes, the colors, please don't send emails like this. It looks fun, but for me reading it, it's busy. There's a lot going on. This next one, you can see all of the text lingo and how it was not spell checked. Things are spelled wrong, which I don't know how you could tell because they use so much text lingo. And then you can see that there's a random basketball down there. I'm pretty sure that's an emoticon. Don't use emoticons in email simply because if you're typing an emoticon from your phone, it may not translate the same as in Outlook or the same on an Android phone. I know there's a couple times I've been texting with an Android user, and the emoticon doesn't even look the same when it gets to their side. So, you know, this email there's a lot there. So this next one looks completely normal. Because this is actually an example from one of our inner use copiers here. And this looks like something you guys probably get on a daily basis, but this is an email I received, and me being in IT, I recognize what that copier name is, and I know where it came from and what copier it came from, and I was probably expecting it. But if you just get that randomly from someone, are you going to want to answer that or open it for that matter? What does this chat say? Tracy, I can send the entire PowerPoint to you guys too, so you can look at it afterwards. So this is one of my biggest pet peeves. I received this email. I don't know what it is, who it's from, what the PDF has on it. If you're sending somebody something from a copier, it's good practice to just send it to yourself from the copier and then forward the scanned copy to someone else and change the subject line to something pertinent. Even, you know, maybe save the PDF and resave the PDF as a different name, just so that it has more explanation to it. You know, you guys have copiers that you send as yourself, so the recipient actually knows who it's coming from, but the rest of the county doesn't use the same copier systems that you guys do. So we get this stuff a lot. IT does a lot, where we just get these messages that don't say who they're from. So I would just say good practice, send it to yourself first and then forward it on, just so the generic subject line's not there at least. Talk about Microsoft Office 365 for a second, just because we're quickly implementing it, and I think several times we implement something and like Office 365, and it just happens quickly, and we don't go over it. And I'm trying to save enough time so that we can have questions. Office 365, now called Microsoft 365, is a whole suite of other services. It's your Office products, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, but it also includes Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, a whole bunch of other stuff. We used to host all of our email in the data center downtown, but now we've moved all of your email to the cloud, which has made things more effective for you guys and easier for us to manage. I was asked to talk about an email mailbox limit. There is a mailbox limit. It's 50 gigs per user, but technically the data is pooled between all of us. So I highly doubt that anyone in the organization has more than even approaching 50 gigabytes of data. I know that one of your employees is on a list that I have that they have a very large mailbox, but it is still nowhere close to 50. They're probably approaching 50% of that, but they're not close to 50. 50 gigabytes in your email that's excessive. If you've got that much email, you definitely need to go through and clean your mailbox out. But the other thing to consider is, you know, we are subject to public records law, and if the email is no longer administratively necessary, then sure, delete it. But if it's pertinent to something that you need to keep for public records, then by all means, keep it. As I mentioned, junk and spam, we're retraining the junk and spam filter right now. So be sure to be checking your junk folder and marking things. If it is junk and it's in the junk folder, leave it alone. You don't have to do anything with it. But if it's junk, if it's in your junk folder and it wasn't junk, move it to your inbox. Actually right click on it and go to junk options. And I think you can hit not junk, and then it will move it to your inbox and then ask you if you want to add the sender to the safe senders list, and you can hit yes. So the nice thing that came with Office 365 is message encryption. Email inherently is not secure. So we've had to adapt over the decades to make email secure. And this is one of the ways that Office 365, one of the reasons we went to Office 365 is that you can encrypt your mail when you send it. So if your email has something that you would like to encrypt, all you have to do is go to options and then hit the encrypt button, and it will encrypt the message end to end. If the person on the other end is an Office 365 user or an Outlook 2016 user, it will automatically decrypt the message and they won't have to do anything special. If you send an encrypted message to someone outside of Office 365 or outside our organization, it will simply ask them to click a link and log in to view the message and respond. And so the encryption is super nice. You can also choose do not forward, and that will shut down the forward function, and it will also not allow them to print the message. So that's kind of cool.
Jay, can you give an example of a time that we would want to send an encrypted email versus, not?
So one of the things to remember is that the message itself is encrypted, if you have something attached like a PDF, it's going to encrypt the PDF inside that email, but it doesn't know the contents of the PDF. You can set up special rules, Outlook Exchange is the mail system. Exchange can detect HIPAA protected or PHI and encrypt automatically. We have that turned on so that it tries and catches things in the email message. But if you're sending medical records, if you're sending for you guys, if you're sending even an ISP, I would think you would send an ISP or an IEP encrypted anyway, just because it contains a lot of personal data on your client. So it's not a bad idea to just encrypt your messages all the time. I mean, it's probably overkill, but it's never bad to have more security than less security. So if you feel that the information in the email is something that should be secured, there's no reason you shouldn't just hit the encrypt button and encrypt it. So I have about 10 minutes left. I just wanted to talk about you guys in particular with your multiple email addresses. So I have Rachel's user account up here, Rachel McCoy's user account up here, just to give you an idea of what's happening on our end. Office 365 doesn't allow us to have multiple logins. So when you log into Office 365, you're using your @fairfieldcountyohio.gov email address, and I will say it looks like an email address, but I won't get into the technicalities of it. It's not an email address. It's your login for our systems. So that's why you have to use that account to log into Office 365. That account also happens to match your mailbox address. You can see here that it's probably pretty tiny, and I apologize, but you can see here in the first screenshot that Rachel has a rachel.mccoy@fairfieldcountyohio.gov SMTP address, and that she can receive mail at that address, but you guys don't use that address as your regular email. You use your @fairfielddd.com addresses, and you can see toward the bottom, the capitalized SMTP is her primary email address. And it's just, this is a list of, I'm pointing at the screen like you can see. This list of what looks like email addresses are just email aliases on the mailbox. And technically, Rachel, for this matter, could receive email at any of these email addresses, and it would still make it to her mailbox. So that's why you guys just have multiple email addresses. Is your sending address is your fairfielddd.com, and your actual login for Office 365 is fairfieldcountyohio.gov. So I think, Brian's not on the call to correct me. I think for the most part, you will always use your @fairfieldcountyohio.gov address to log into things, or your short login. Like if you're logging into employee self-service. But other than that, your fairfielddd.com email is just that. It is only an email. Now that I think about it, I think you might log into KnowBe4 with your Fairfield DD. I don't know. I'll ask Brian. If anybody's worried about it, they can email me and we can try and figure it out. So that is everything that I know about email etiquette. Does anybody have any questions or?
I just have one I want to add.
Sure.
Just because of my previous life when I was teaching, there are a lot of people who don't read cursive. For a lot of schools, we're not teaching it. And folks who English was not their first language often didn't learn the same letters as us. So when we're talking about fonts, that kind of made me think, like, especially emailing young families, they actually may not know cursive, which is a whole nother conversation. But about.
Yes, and that goes back to being culturally conscious too. Just, not every culture uses the same letters, and I do see a lot of signatures with cursive names in signatures, and that's a good point, Anne.
Jay, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
You said on there about replying to all, is how, and if it's not pertaining to the conversation, you wouldn't do that. We get a lot of emails, saying, something's approved or whatever. I don't typically reply back to those, like say thank you or anything like that. Is that considered bad etiquette on my part by not emailing back thanking them for it?
No, I think if you're the recipient of an email with several other people on there also, they probably didn't intend an actual response, unless they asked for a response in the message. But if if I send you an email and it's not something that, you necessarily need to add anything to, but you just want to say, hey, yeah, I did get your email. And that kind of tunes down on the 3 days later, did you get my email type thing.
Gotcha.
It's kind of a catch-22. Like if you don't respond, then they get worried that you didn't get it, but then you do respond and they don't care that you responded. So it's just kind of a use your discretion type thing. It was,
Okay.
That point was more of a, if you get, and this happens more and more now, if you're getting an email that wasn't intended for you, just make sure that you don't just delete it. Actually tell them that, hey, you've got the wrong person, just so they know that they need to make a correction somewhere.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Let me see if I can pull up my email.
Are you thinking about your hyphen?
Yeah.
Jay, how do you feel about the delayed response option in Outlook?
What do you mean?
Well, so like you were talking about how people don't send, you don't want to necessarily send an email at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Do you use that because of that?
I personally have never used it for that reason, just because I think people are used to getting odd, random hour messages from me. But I think I've used the delayed response, like if I want to say that, there'll be a maintenance outage on something coming up, or but I don't want to send it until it's closer to time. I don't think that's a bad idea to use that. I think the thing to check on that is the timestamps, because sometimes it'll say that it was sent at a certain time, but it was delayed until a certain time. So that might be something to just be aware of, that the timestamps may be different. So I don't know if that's any better for you to see. I don't know if I can zoom on Zoom. But you can see I've got, I actually have a couple of spaces and then a hyphen and then my signature, because I start typing up at the top here. And then it adds an extra line up there. So, and if we look at my signature options, mail, signatures. Oh, I guess I don't have a space in there. Okay. So you can go into your signature options and just set that up. And this is also where you would go in and tell Outlook when to use the appropriate signature. If you want to have a different signature for replies and forwards, you can create a separate signature just for that. I use the same one for everything. You also, like, say you have different job responsibilities, you could create a different signature. Say you're in charge of Special Olympics, but you have your day job at DD, but you can create a separate signature that sets your signature line to something Special Olympics related, so that people that you're emailing about SO have the correct name and title on their emails. All right.
Jay, one thing for DD, I think we need to have, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are still required to have that disclosure included, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the fun thing is, and we've discussed this at the, so fun fact about our IT department, the IT department is actually governed by the Board of Records Retention and Automated Data Processing, which is a board that's made up of representatives from all departments in the county, and including DD. DD does have a representative on the board. So that board has discussed forcing the confidentiality and privacy statements for various organizations, just so you don't have to be responsible for putting it in your signature anymore. Exchange would actually add it after you send the message, which is kind of nice. And we can narrow those down to by department. So I know you guys have a specific confidentiality statement that's a little different from other organizations in the county use. So we've discussed doing something like that, just so that it doesn't have to be part of your organization's onboarding process. So that's just something to consider too, that we're capable of doing that. Lisa, good question, but I'm not going to talk about that. So we can even add your signatures. If any of you have ever corresponded with somebody at JFS, JFS's signatures are actually post-pended to the message. They don't actually put those in. The state's exchange mail system actually adds their signatures to the end of all of their messages based off of their name, their title, their contact information, all the stuff that's stored in their payroll system. So we've also looked into doing something like that too, so that all you have to do is type the message and hit send, and you don't have to add your signature. You don't have to add your confidentiality statements. Of course, there's a way to override that in Outlook for them also. Like if they want to use a different signature or something, there are ways to fix that. But yeah, there are Office 365. We pay a lot for Office 365, but the reason we went to it was because it enables us to have so many more options than we did have with our old email system. So yeah, that was a lot more information than you probably all wanted. But any other questions?
I will say something I just recently learned is if you have a signature built into your email, it does not populate in an out of office message unless you copy and paste it into that box.
Right. Yeah, there are several instances where your signature will not automatically populate. And another one to remember is if you are in Adobe Reader looking at a PDF and you want to send that PDF to someone and you hit the mail button and it's supposed to open Outlook, a new message in Outlook, your signature will not auto-populate there either. So it's important to remember that you need to come up here to the signature and choose which signature you want and add that there.
Right. I was at Dingaling and didn't realize that until about a few weeks ago.
Yeah. The nice thing with once we convert to OneDrive and move your documents over to OneDrive, you can just add things direct from a new message, and then you won't have to worry about adding your signature every time.
And just so if you just heard him say that and you're like, what, we're changing something again? Jay and I have already talked, and before he moves it, we will do a training on how to access that and where everything's going to go. So it's not something you have to start doing right now.
No. And if you've already moved things to OneDrive, we have departments that are using it, but they're just not using our implementation of it. If you've already moved things to OneDrive, we'll work that out too. So nothing to panic about quite yet.
Any other questions for Jay while we have him here?
So you said that we had things on OneDrive. That will probably go straight over then?
Yeah, if you've already got things in OneDrive, you can keep it there. The only kink we're working out is that we're going to automatically move your documents and desktop items over to OneDrive. So the kink we need to work out is to not overwrite what you've already got in there.
Okay, because Ned told me to put some stuff there, and that's what I did.
Yep, it's fine. We'll figure out the logistics for it when we get there. We're currently testing with a couple of really tiny departments that either don't. You guys have what's called redirected documents, where your documents and desktop look like they're on the local computer, but they're actually stored on the server. So right now I'm testing the OneDrive move with people who aren't using redirected folders right now, so that we can see how it's going to work for people who don't have redirected already. And then I'm going to work with another department, my favorite little tiny department, the coroner's department, which is a department of basically one. And they have redirected folders, and see how the data will move into OneDrive and see how if it will overwrite or if it will just put stuff side by side. So we'll I would anticipate that probably in the next month that'll be something that we'll be ready to look at rolling out for your department.
Hey, Ray.
or I'm sorry, Jay. Hey, this is Susan. I've had a big problem with certain people continuing to end up in junk mail, even when I set up a rule for them. Ray Sabula is one of them. That's where the name Ray was coming from. But yeah, there's a handful that I have to go back through and move them continually.
So there's some other rules at work behind the scenes, and there are several stipulations that an email has to meet in order for it to make it to your inbox. And even though you've told it it's a safe sender, there might be something, basically what we call the header of the email address, or the actual incoming email. There may be something in the header that the spam filter doesn't like, even though you've added them to the whitelist and allowed them to come through. There might just be something in there that spam doesn't like. So we can always, if you send an email, and Brian can look into why that email might be going to spam continuously.
Okay, I'd appreciate it. Some of them are pretty important.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm checking on a regular basis, but you know, I'm afraid I'm going to miss one.
If you just forward one of those emails that went to junk to Brian and I both, we can look into maybe what's going on with it.
Okay, thanks.
Steal a trick from Dawn. She moved her junk mail up to the very top of the list of Outlook content, or you know, your folders on the left-hand side. I totally did it when she said this because it was a great idea. That way you can, it populates, like you just see it faster.
Yep. Yeah, and I moved. I didn't think of that trick either. And as soon as we moved to Office 365, someone else in the IT office mentioned that they moved their junk folder up so that they would see the number change. And that was an easy way to keep tabs on your junk folder. So
well, Jay, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Sure.
If you wouldn't mind, could you just send me the PowerPoint and I'll send it out with the video link so that people want to see and learn later? We can do that.
Yep, sure will.
Any other questions for Jay while we have him?
Good job, Jay. Lots of good info.
Thanks.
All right.